The silence of deep space was all Thomas knew now. His small research vessel drifted helplessly through the void, oxygen supplies dwindling after the catastrophic engine failure. 3 weeks had passed since the accident, and Thomas had long given up hope of rescue. The company he worked for, Global Space Industries, had made their position painfully clear in their final transmission. Rescue operation deemed financially unviable. Assets will be written off. Our condolences. Thomas watched the oxygen level indicator drop another percentage point. He had perhaps 2 days left. In his cramped quarters, surrounded by blinking emergency lights, he continued recording his daily log, more out of habit than purpose. Day 24 adrift, position unchanged, no response to distress signals. His voice sounded hollow even to himself. The former astronaut ran his fingers through his unkempt beard, thinking of his cottage in Cornwall, where he'd planned to retire next year. The small garden overlooking the sea, the quiet life he'd never have now. As the ship's systems preserved what little power remained, Thomas closed his eyes, accepting his fate among the stars. For a man who had always loved space, it seemed fitting, if terribly lonely, to end here. The steady beep of the oxygen monitor kept time like a cruel clock. Thomas opened the small locket he wore around his neck. Inside was a picture of his late wife, Mary. Her smile still warmed him, even now. "I might be joining you sooner than I thought, love," he whispered to the photo. Thomas remembered their last conversation before this mission. Mary had been gone 5 years, but he still talked to her sometimes. He had promised this would be his final journey before retirement. One last trip to the stars, then he would spend his remaining years tending to the garden she had loved so much. He pulled himself from his bunk with effort. The low oxygen was making him tired and slow. Thomasy floated to the small viewport and gazed out at the endless black. Tiny pinpricks of light, stars and distant worlds, stared back, indifferent to his plight. The ship's computer spoke in its flat, emotionless voice. "Power reserves at 12%. Life support priority protocols engaged." Thomas nodded to himself. The computer would shut down all non-essential systems soon. The lights would go, the heating would reduce further. But the oxygen recyclers would keep working until the very end. He made his way to the small galley. His food supplies, carefully rationed, would outlast him. Thomas allowed himself a small luxury, a packet of real tea he had saved for a special occasion. If these were to be his final days, he would at least have this small comfort. The hot liquid warmed his hands through the sealed mug. Steam fogged the viewport briefly before disappearing. Thomas sipped slowly, savoring the taste of home. In the storage locker, he found the bottle of whiskey he had smuggled aboard. Against regulations, of course, but what did that matter now? He poured a small measure into his cooling tea. "Cheers, old girl," he said to Mary's picture. "Not how I planned to use this, but I think the occasion calls for it," Thomas returned. To his logs. If someone ever found his ship, years from now perhaps, they should know what happened. He spoke clearly into the recorder. "This will likely be my final entry. To whoever finds this vessel, please return my personal effects to the address stored in my crew file. There's not much, just the cottage in Cornwall and some old books. No family left now." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I don't blame the company for their decision. Space exploration has always been about cold numbers. I knew the risks when I signed up, but if you're listening to this and you work for Global Space Industries, perhaps consider that your assets have names. They have homes they want to return to. They have gardens waiting to be tended." Thomas closed the log. The effort of speaking left him lightheaded. He should conserve his energy now. The ship's lighting dimmed further as the computer cut more power. Emergency strips along the floor cast an eerie blue glow throughout the cabin. He thought about the irony of his situation. 30 years exploring the frontiers of space, and now space would claim him. There were worse ways to go, he supposed. At least it was peaceful. Thomas settled back into his bunk. He placed Mary's picture on his chest and pulled the thermal blanket up. The ship had grown colder as the heating reduced to minimal levels. His breath formed small clouds in the chilled air. "Just a long sleep," he murmured to himself. "That's all." As he drifted toward unconsciousness, Thomas thought he heard something. A faint noise cutting through the silence of his dying ship. He forced his eyes open and listened harder. There it was again. A crackling sound from the communications panel. Static, perhaps, or just his oxygen-deprived mind playing tricks. Then, through the static, a voice. Faint, but unmistakable. Unidentified. "Vessel, this is Rescue Ship Horizon. Do you copy?" Thomas stared at the comm panel in disbelief. The light there, dead for weeks, now blinked with incoming transmission signals. "This is impossible," he whispered. With the last of his strength, Thomas pushed himself toward the communication station. His fingers, numb with cold, reached for the response button. Day 26 arrived with a jolt that startled Thomas from his fitful sleep. Something had bumped his vessel. Disoriented and weak from rationing, he pulled himself to the control panel. To queue. Communications system, dead for weeks, suddenly crackled to life. "Unidentified vessel, this is Captain William Moore of the Pathfinder. We've detected your distress beacon. Do you copy?" Thomas stared at the radio in disbelief. His trembling hands fumbled with the controls. This is Thomas Fletcher. I copy. I'm here." His voice broke with emotion. The voice that responded was steady, professional, but carried unmistakable warmth. "We've got you, Thomas. Prepare for rescue protocol. Your company abandoned you, but we don't leave people behind." Through the viewport, Thomas could now see the massive silhouette of a ship. Not his company's, but from their chief competitor, North Star Explorations. As the larger vessel maneuvered closer, Thomas felt something he'd abandoned days ago. Hope. "Why?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you rescue a competitor's man?" Captain Moore's response was immediate. "Because before we're competitors, we're human beings, Thomas. And out here, that's what matters most." Thomas pressed his face against the cold viewport glass. The Pathfinder was truly magnificent, a deep space rescue vessel built for situations exactly like this, its powerful spotlights now illuminated. Thomas's small research craft, making the damage even more visible. Tears welled in his eyes as he realized he wasn't going to die here after all. "Thomas, I need you to listen carefully," Captain Moore continued. "Your ship has sustained critical damage. We're going to attempt docking, but we need to know your vessel's status." Thomas wiped his eyes and tried to focus. "Life support is at minimal levels. Oxygen at 14%. Main power down to emergency reserves only. Docking mechanism was damaged in the initial explosion." There was a pause before Captain Moore responded. "Understood. We'll use the emergency coupling. Procedure. Do you have a pressure suit?" Thomas glanced at the emergency locker. "Yes, standard issue. It's intact." "Good. Put it on now, Thomas, just in case." With trembling hands, Thomas opened the locker and pulled out the suit. It felt heavier than he remembered, or perhaps he was just weaker now. He struggled into it piece by piece, his breathing labored in the thin air. Through the viewport, Thomas could see activity on the Pathfinder. A docking tube was extending slowly toward his vessel. He watched in fascination as the massive ship carefully maneuvered closer. "Tell me about yourself, Thomas." Captain Moore's voice came through the suit's communication system. "Keep talking while we work." Thomas understood the captain wanted to keep him alert and focused. "Been in space 28 years. This was supposed to be my last mission before retirement. Got a cottage in Cornwall waiting for me." "Cornwall's beautiful," Moore replied. "My family vacationed in St. Ives when I was a boy." "You have family waiting?" Thomas felt the familiar pang of loss. "My wife Mary passed 5 years ago. No children, just me and the cottage now, and a garden that's probably wild by now." The radio was quiet for a moment. Then Moore spoke again, his voice softer. "I'm sorry about your wife, Thomas. My Jane is waiting back home. 30 years married next month." There was a loud clank as the docking tube made first contact with Thomas's ship. The vessel shuddered slightly. "Good contact," a new voice announced. "Beginning seal procedure." Thomas held his breath. If this failed, both ships could be compromised. "Thomas," Captain Moore said, "I want you to know something. When we picked up your distress signal, headquarters told us to ignore it. Said it wasn't our problem." Thomas wasn't surprised. Such was the cutthroat nature of space exploration companies. "But I served with your commander once, years ago, Richard Bell. We were on the Jupiter mission together. He saved my life during the solar storm of 42. I couldn't leave his man to die, Thomas remembered Commander Bell fondly. He retired 3 years ago, lives in Scotland now. Well, I owe him one, and now I'm repaying that debt. The docking sequence continued with mechanical precision. Thomas could hear the seals engaging, the pressure equalizing between the ships. Why didn't my company come? Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. Captain Moore's sigh came through clearly. Official statement says your location was too remote. Rescue costs exceeded asset value. Unofficial word is they're in financial trouble, cutting losses. Thomas nodded to himself. He was an asset that had been written off. A green light flashed on the docking controls. The seal was complete. We're secure, the technician's voice announced. Pressure stable. Thomas, Captain Moore said, there's a crew member coming through now. His name is Peter. He's our medical officer. Your oxygen levels have been low for weeks. You might feel strange when you enter our atmosphere. Peter will help you. As if on cue, the inner door of the docking tube slid open. A man in a North Star uniform stood there, medical kit in hand. He was younger than Thomas expected, with kind eyes and a steady gaze. Hello, Thomas, Peter said. Ready to come home? Thomas took one last look around the small vessel that had been both his prison and his life support for these desperate weeks. He touched Mary's picture in his suit pocket. More than ready, he replied. Peter helped Thomas into the docking tube, supporting him as his legs threatened to give way. The walk was short, but to Thomas it felt like crossing between worlds, from death back to life. As they reached the Pathfinder's airlock, Thomas saw Captain William Moore waiting. He was a tall man with greying hair and lines of experience, etched into his face. Welcome aboard, Thomas Fletcher, Moore said, extending his hand. Let's get you home. The rescue was not without complications. Thomas's vessel had suffered extensive damage, making standard docking procedures impossible. Through the viewport, he watched as a figure in a spacesuit emerged from the Pathfinder and carefully navigated the distance between ships. Fletcher, this is Oliver, Chief Engineer. I'm coming to get you, mate. Just stay calm. The hours that followed tested both men as Oliver worked to create a temporary airlock bridge. Thomas, weak from weeks of minimal rations and oxygen deprivation, could offer little help. My company left me to die, Thomas confessed as Oliver worked. Said I wasn't worth the fuel. Oliver paused his work. Well, our captain believes differently. His brother was lost on Mars 10 years ago. No rescue came. He resumed his task with renewed determination. That's why he built this company, to never leave anyone behind. When the pathway between vessels was finally secure, Oliver guided Thomas through. The journey was merely 30 meters, but to Thomas it felt like crossing between worlds, from certain death to unexpected life. As they reached the airlock of the Pathfinder, Thomas collapsed. Oliver caught him, supporting his weight. I've got you, friend, Oliver said. You're not alone anymore. The brightness inside the Pathfinder hurt Thomas's eyes after weeks in the dimly lit emergency lighting of his own vessel. Voices surrounded him as crew members rushed to help. Someone took his helmet off. The rich oxygen of the ship made him dizzy. Easy now, Oliver said, still supporting most of Thomas's weight. Your body needs time to adjust. A medical officer appeared with a wheelchair. I'm Dr. Robert. Let's get you to the medical bay right away. Thomas tried to stand on his own, but his legs buckled beneath him. 3 weeks of floating in zero gravity and minimal food had weakened his muscles. The crew gently helped him into the wheelchair. My ship, Thomas said weakly. My logs and personal items. Don't worry, Oliver assured him. We'll retrieve everything important. Focus on getting better first. The medical bay was clean and well-equipped. Dr. Robert and a nurse named Lucy helped Thomas onto an examination bed. They removed his spacesuit and attached monitoring devices to check his vital signs. Severe dehydration, Dr. Robert noted. Oxygen saturation below normal. Muscle atrophy from extended zero-G. Nothing we can't fix. Lucy inserted an IV line into Thomas's arm. This will help restore your fluids and provide nutrients. Thomas felt the cool liquid enter his veins. Already he felt slightly stronger. Captain Moore entered the medical bay, still wearing his uniform but without his cap. Up close, Thomas could see the lines of worry and responsibility on his face. "How is our guest?" Moore asked Dr. Robert. "He'll recover fully with proper care and rest," the doctor replied. "No permanent damage, though it was a close call." Moore nodded and turned to Thomas. "You had maybe 12 hours of oxygen left. We nearly missed you." Thomas tried to sit up, but Lucy gently pushed him back down. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. "I still don't understand why you came." Moore pulled up a chair beside the bed. The captain looked tired, like a man carrying a heavy burden. 10 years ago, my younger brother Jack was stationed on Mars Outpost 7. There was an accident, a pressure failure in one section. The company running the outpost decided a rescue mission was economically unfeasible. They wrote off the entire station as a loss. Thomas saw the pain in Moore's eyes as he continued. Jack survived the initial accident. He sent messages for 3 days, begging for help that never came. His final message was... Moore paused, collecting himself. His final message was that he forgave me for not coming, as if I had any choice in the matter. "I'm sorry," Thomas whispered. "After that, I left the company, used every credit I had to help start North Star with some like-minded colleagues. We built this ship specifically for deep space rescue operations." Moore's voice strengthened. "We've saved 17 lives in situations where other companies would have written them off as losses." Dr. Robert approached with a small device. "I need to check your lung function, Mr. Fletcher. Take a deep breath when I say." As Thomas followed the doctor's instructions, Captain Moore stood and straightened his uniform. "Get some rest. We'll talk more later. When you're feeling better, I have a proposition for you." Thomas wanted to ask what he meant, but exhaustion was overtaking him. The medication in the IV was making him drowsy. His eyes grew heavy as Moore left the medical bay. When Thomas woke hours later, Oliver was sitting beside his bed reading something on a tablet. "There he is," Oliver said cheerfully. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Thomas felt stronger already. The IV was still attached, but he could sit up without help now. "How long was I asleep?" "About 10 hours. Doctor says that's exactly what you needed." Thomas noticed a small box on the table beside his bed. Oliver followed his gaze. "We retrieved your personal effects from your ship," he explained. "Your logs, some photos, and that bottle of whiskey you had hidden in the storage locker." Thomas smiled for the first time in weeks. "Not very professional of me. After what you've been through, I'd say you've earned it." Oliver set his tablet down. "Now, are you feeling up to visitors? Some of the crew want to meet the man we traveled 3 weeks off course to save." 3 weeks? Thomas was shocked. "You diverted your mission by 3 weeks for me." Oliver nodded. "Captain's orders. Like I told you during the rescue, we don't leave people behind. That's not just company policy, it's personal for everyone aboard this ship." As if on cue, the door opened and several crew members entered. They introduced themselves one by one: the navigator, communications officer, the pilot who had skillfully maneuvered the Pathfinder close enough for the rescue. Each had a welcome and a kind word. Thomas was overwhelmed by their warmth. After weeks alone facing death in the cold emptiness of space, the simple human connection brought tears to his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you." Later, when the others had gone, Oliver remained. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "Your company, Global Space Industries, they've denied all responsibility. They're claiming they had a rescue plan in place and that we interfered." Thomas wasn't surprised. "Corporate politics." "Captain Moore says not to worry. When we reach Earth, the truth will come out." Oliver stood to leave. "Rest now. Tomorrow you can start rehabilitation exercises. Doctor says you'll be walking on your own in a few days." As Oliver reached the door, Thomas called after him. "What did the captain mean about having a proposition for me?" Oliver smiled. "I think he wants to offer you a job. We could use someone with your experience." The door closed, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. Outside the window of the medical bay, he could see the stars, the same stars that had nearly witnessed his end. Now they watched over his new beginning. Thomas lay in the medical bay, his body weak and struggling to recover after his long ordeal. Dr. Emma Wilson watched over him carefully, monitoring his progress with a professional yet compassionate eye. The first week of his rescue was a blur of pain, weakness, and slow healing. When Emma mentioned that his company had been informed of his rescue, Thomas already knew their response would be cold and calculating. His bitter comment about them caring more about lost equipment than his survival hung in the air, confirmed by Emma's telling silence. Captain William Moore became a regular visitor during Thomas's second week of recovery. The captain was a solid, sturdy man with eyes that reflected the harsh realities of space exploration. He shared a personal story with Thomas, the loss of his own brother in the vast emptiness of space. But Thomas's rescue had given William a chance to save someone, to make up for the loss he couldn't prevent before. Slowly, Thomas found himself becoming part of the Pathfinder's crew. It wasn't something he expected. The navigator, James, taught him card games during long hours of recovery. Elizabeth, the communications officer, made sure he wasn't alone by sharing meals with him. These people had no obligation to care for him, yet they did. William's offer came unexpectedly. A position at North Star awaited Thomas when they returned to Earth. It seemed impossible. Why would they want someone who had worked for a competing company? But William's response was simple and profound. Out here in space, companies meant nothing. People meant everything. As Thomas looked out at the stars, he saw them differently now. These same stars that had almost become his permanent tomb were now a reminder of his second chance. The vast darkness that had nearly claimed his life was now a backdrop to his unexpected rescue and newfound connection with the Pathfinder's crew. His body was healing, but something else was changing too. The isolation and near-death experience had stripped away his old professional barriers. He was no longer just a corporate worker, but a survivor, a human connection in the middle of an unforgiving universe. The medical bay became less of a prison and more of a place of transformation. Each day, Thomas grew stronger. Each conversation with the crew showed him a different side of human connection, one that transcended corporate boundaries and survival calculations. William's daily visits were more than just checkups. They were conversations about survival, about hope, about finding meaning in the most unexpected places. The captain saw something in Thomas, perhaps a reflection of his lost brother, perhaps just another human worth saving. Elizabeth's meals, James's card games, Emma's medical care, they were all small acts of humanity that slowly rebuilt Thomas's trust in people. He had been alone for so long, trapped in a professional world of cold calculations and corporate interests. Now, he was experiencing something entirely different. As the Pathfinder continued its journey back to Earth, Thomas began to imagine a different future. The job offer from William wasn't just a professional opportunity. It was an invitation to be part of something larger, a community that valued human life over corporate profits. The stars outside continued to shine, silent witnesses to Thomas's incredible journey of survival and unexpected human connection. From near death to rescue, from isolation to community, his story was just beginning. Thomas's journey back to Earth was filled with hope and determination. The 6-week trip aboard, the Pathfinder had transformed him completely. He was no longer the broken man they had rescued, but someone with a clear mission. On their final night in space, Thomas stood on the observation deck with Elizabeth. She offered him a cup of tea, a simple gesture that now meant so much. She asked about the job offer from North Star, and Thomas knew his answer. He would take the job, but not before doing something important. Thomas wanted to speak to the Space Safety Commission about his experience. He was determined to ensure no other worker would be left behind, considered too expensive to save. Captain Moore understood the risk. Speaking out might damage Thomas's professional reputation. But Thomas had learned something valuable during his rescue. Some things matter more than a career. The lessons from the Pathfinder's crew had changed him deeply. When they landed in Cornwall, media crowds were waiting. Global space industries tried to control the story, claiming they were planning a rescue. But Thomas was ready to tell the truth. His honest testimony created big changes in space industry rules, improving safety for all workers. 6 months later, Thomas lived in his cottage by the sea. North Star had given him a good job and a new start. Elizabeth visited often, and their friendship was growing into something more special. The small recording device from his days adrift remained in his pocket, a reminder of how close he came to death. Looking at the sunset, Thomas reflected on his journey. He had survived the coldest, loneliest experience possible, yet he found warmth in human connection. The vast, dark space that almost killed him had also shown him the true meaning of humanity. His cottage overlooked the beautiful sea, a stark contrast to the emptiness he had experienced. Thomas had transformed from a forgotten worker to a person who could make a difference. The Pathfinder's crew had not just saved his life, they had given him a new purpose. Elizabeth's friendship, William's support, and the crew's kindness had rebuilt Thomas's trust in people. He was no longer alone. The space industry would be different because of his story. Workers would be better protected. Rescue protocols would be improved. As the sun set, Thomas smiled. He had survived. More than that, he had found a way to turn his terrible experience into something positive. The cold of space could not defeat the warmth of human compassion. Space may be cold, he whispered to himself, watching the beautiful colors spread across the sky, but humanity doesn't have to. His journey was complete. A new chapter was beginning.